Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Vital Conversations, Dialogues on Living and Dying Well. I'm your host, Kim Adams, and happy again to be with you. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. And for those of you that are returners, welcome back, and we're happy to have you. And so tonight, we have a wonderful, wonderful speaker, or I should say co-facilitator here with me, who is going to be speaking on a topic that's really near and dear to my heart as well. And I'll get into a little bit more of parts of my story as we go along, but grief and loss is really my entry point, or was my entry point into this death and dying and end of life work 20 years ago when my grandmother passed. So it's really important to me, and so I'm really thrilled tonight that we have Girish with us, a grief guide, and someone that's really going to speak to us about the importance of moving through grief and what does that mean. So we have a lot to share. So in addition to any comments and questions, feel free to be able to jump in and engage with us. You'll notice on the right-hand side of your computer screen, there's a chat function. And so I'd encourage you, go ahead and type in now and say hello. Let us know where you're listening in from. And that will be your way to communicate with Uma and I tonight. Type in any questions, comments. We really want this to be engaging and interactive. So we welcome that for sure. Just a little housekeeping. In addition to that, we are live technology here using Webinar Jam. So for those of you who might be new to this, occasionally there's some buffering or some issues with sound or something with the picture. 9 times out of 10, if you just refresh your browser, you'll be okay. If for some reason that doesn't make a clear screen for you and you can't hear it, I have put in the chat function a little sticky note that says what the YouTube channel is, where this is being recorded. So feel free, if you're having continuous problems, to just go over there and watch the YouTube channel. And rest assured that this replay will go to all of you, and so that will be clear. So even if you're having problems watching it now, the replay should be crystal clear for you. So, okay, so as I said, we have a lot to get to. Grief, loss. So we're in the context of this webinar series of Vital Conversations, Dialogues on Living and Dying Well. And so grief occurs, of course, we'll probably be speaking majority tonight about after the death of a loved one. So with family members and friends and caregivers. Grief also occurs during the journey. So we'll be talking about that. Caregivers, as I mentioned. So the loss and the death of an individual, a pet, a relationship, a job loss of a dream. So we'll be covering, the broad spectrum of loss and grief and what that means. So without further ado, and I love that we're already getting people to say hello and where they're calling in from. We have Jackie from Ontario. We have Claire from Cape Cod. Whoa, they're coming in. We have Michael from Massachusetts. Great to see some familiar names and faces, so welcome, my friends. We have Jane. We have Chris from Massachusetts, and we have Jane from South Texas, Rebecca from Montana. So this is excellent. Keep typing in where you're calling from. Mary, welcome, Mary. And so let me just get started here with reading Uma's bio, just so we get a little background on who Uma is. So Uma Girish, she's a grief guide, she's a certified dream coach, and she's an award-winning author. Her books include a transformational memoir, Losing Amma, Finding Home, a memoir about love, loss, and life's detours, published by Hay House in 2014. You may recognize that's part of the title of tonight's talk, Love, Loss, and Life's Detours. And she also has an ebook, Understanding Death, 10 Ways to Inner Peace for the Grieving. Uma hosts a weekly podcast called The Grammar of Grief, and she writes a blog by the same name. Her intention is to help women transitioning through loss to transform their pain into purpose so that they can live a life of meaning and joy and find a new dream. Uma is also a hospice and bereavement volunteer who's a compassion to the dying and their grieving family members. And she also facilitates a weekly reminiscent and life lessons group at a retirement community. She firmly believes that every time an elder dies, a library burns down. Sharing their stories and validating their lives is a key goal that Uma has in working with these seniors. So, without further ado, welcome, Uma.
Thank you, Kim. It's such a pleasure to be joining you today.
Great. Well, we're happy to have you. And we, like I said in the beginning, we have lots to cover. So let's just start and take us back to the spring of 2008 and begin to share your journey from there.
Wow, yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday. We had arrived in Chicago in May of 2008, my husband, my daughter who was 15, and I, from India, all the way from India. And 10 days after we moved to Chicago, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. She was only 68. She was in India at the time, living with my sister and brother-in-law and my dad. She was actually the primary caregiver to my father, who had been bedridden for quite a few years before that. And so when her diagnosis of breast cancer came about, it was a shock to the family, especially to us who had moved so recently. I had lived in India all my life. I was born and raised there. I got on a plane, went back to India just to be with her for 6 weeks and help her through her chemo and radiation. But when I got back, I didn't realize that that was the last time I would be seeing my mother. She passed away 8 months later, which was the January of 2009.
Wow. And so that set about a real journey for you.
It did. It transformed my entire world. It shifted me from the way I had been living, the way I had been engaging with life and people, the things I had been thinking about, to a space where I started to ask the big life questions. It really woke me up and demanded in a very urgent way, in some way that it hadn't ever before, that this life that we have is a gift and we're meant to do something with it. We are meant to live it with passion and purpose. And although I had had the idea that life was meant to be purposeful and we were here for a reason, I hadn't really delved into that subject with any kind of urgency or significance. But my mother's passing really moved me to a space where I started to engage with those questions, think about my own life very differently, what I wanted to do with it and how I wanted to bring more meaning and passion and purpose into the way I experience life here.
Beautiful. So we will certainly get to kind of that end of that spectrum a little bit, or I should say further along that journey. But for maybe some listeners who are either new to the grief process or in terms of experiencing it or unfamiliar with it, let's start with a definition. What is grief and why is it so hard?
Great question. In my view, grief is the response of your heart to any kind of loss, in any kind of loss of connection that you've experienced. So grief just doesn't have to be about the death of someone you love. Grief could be the loss of a body part. It could be a diagnosis that is difficult to accept. There's grief when your spouse, for instance, suffers some kind of illness and your relationship as a result of this, that diagnosis changes and you begin to engage with each other in a way that's different from how it used to be. So in all forms and shapes, it isn't about death alone, and that's probably my biggest message. Grief is something we experience with regard to how we engage with life. When someone loses a job, there's grief there. When a friend betrays you, there's grief there. When a parent is diagnosed with dementia, there's real grief there. Watching a parent decline, age, there's grief in every aspect of life. And it's so hard for us to experience grief because we have rarely been educated in how to respond to grief. We grow up in families that teach us table manners, that teach us how to speak right, be polite, be kind and neighborly, but very rarely are we taught how to experience, embrace, and accept negative emotions. And grief is often labeled a negative emotion because it doesn't feel good. So we do
Mhm.
everything we can to push it away, to shut it down, to not go to that place because it's painful. Oftentimes, that's how family members have modeled it for us. And so, if we've grown up with a mother or father who didn't talk about sadness, who believed that you had to be stoic and carry on no matter what you were feeling, that you had to be left brained and logical and rational in the way you viewed life and experienced life and related to people and situations, we grow up believing that to be our truth. So, grief
Mm.
education is so very necessary, but so rarely experienced.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, and that brings me to, as I said, this is how I got into this work. And for the first 30 years of my life, I didn't know what grief was. And in the context of death and dying, I had, two deaths in my family when starting at the age of 15. And so and then subsequently up until when I was 30, when my grandmother passed. And she and I were so extremely close that I think, as you just described, that we're not taught that, or I like to say the unintentional message I got was just to really move forward, just keep on going. You just don't deal with that. You don't show the emotion. And so what happened? I just stuffed it down. You deny it, you suppress it, you do whatever. And, as both you and I know, it comes out. And for me, it came out physically in my body as digestive issues for a number of years. So when my grandmother passed at 30, there was no containing it, and so that was my first introduction to, whoa, what is this? What are these feelings? What's really going on here? And, being able to then move through that. But yeah, I would absolutely agree that we're not taught that, or we're taught that it's bad, that it's negative, that we shouldn't feel, or we
Yeah.
shouldn't be sad, as you described. So yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. And so, given that message that a lot of us received, what do you have to share in terms of being able to kind of now shift that or flip that, or be able to say, you know what, okay, that was then, but now, as I'm going through this, or there's opportunities now for us, to be able to shift from that. What do you have to say, share about that?
Well, fortunately, I grew up in a family where emotions were accepted. So that was a gift. My mother was a very sensitive, kind, caring woman who never um, stopped from expressing what she was feeling. And we grew up with that model. So it was always easy for me to cry, to talk about my sadness, to share my feelings. We did this sitting around the table, my siblings and I. So ours wasn't a typical family in terms of expressing, just the good and not the bad. We did all of that. We expressed all our emotions, everything that came up. But what I will say to people who haven't had that kind of an experience is that when you know better, you do better, right? When you know that grief is not a bad emotion, that you don't have to have judgments around it, it's part of being human. I like to say, you are not broken, you are simply human. And being human means feeling the good and the bad, the shadow and the light. You don't just get to experience the good parts of life, you also get to experience what doesn't feel good, what's unpleasant. And
Mm,
oftentimes it's through the unpleasant experiences that we grow. Our soul evolves through things that are difficult and challenging, not through the joyous, happy times. I'm sure there's some growth there, but I think it's growth is on steroids when we are challenged, when we are faced with difficult people, when we are in tough situations that we don't understand. So I would say that when you listen to conversations like this, when you read books that move you to that space, get a little curious about the messages you received as a child about grief and sadness, about how to express or how to hide. Um, and then think about how it makes you feel, because
mm,
I believe that your heart has all the answers you need. And if your
mm,
heart says to you, it's okay to cry, it's okay to be who you are accepted. It doesn't matter that you're mad about the fact that your brother died or that your husband was diagnosed with a terrible illness, it's all right to feel what you're feeling, because whatever you don't feel, you won't heal.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important to experience what comes up, because if you don't allow it to come up to the light, how is it going to be healed? It continues to remain in the dark if you don't accept it. So I would say educate yourself, engage in conversations with people you feel safe with, and try another way of being. What you received as a child may not be the complete picture, but when you are an adult, you have the ability to make new choices and engage in new behaviors that are more healthy and meaningful.
Mm, beautiful, beautiful. So I'm really hearing, give yourself the permission to just be, right? So many times we want to move and run and suppress and just fly through grief. And I think, we should touch upon that being able to allow your heart to open, allow your heart to break, allow yourself to feel the emotion, give yourself the permission, as you say, to really do this, because we move through grief. We can't go around it. We can't go over it. We can't go under it, right? We move through it. And as we know, as a culture and a society, we want to avoid pain at all costs. But yet, as you say, without the pain, without the clouds and the rain, we don't know what the sun is like. Without the
Exactly.
sunset and the dark, then we don't know the beauty of the sunrise. So this system that we live in, with the yin and the yang, for example, to be able to do that. But really, what I'm hearing you say is really just open your heart, right? And just be able to move through it. Even though it's painful, there are people there to support us.
Exactly. And unfortunately, we live in a world that celebrates logic and rationale. We're taught to think about everything. We're taught to be analytical. We're taught to dissect and take things apart. So what do we do when it comes to grief and sadness? We try and analyze it, understand it, dissect it. We believe there has to be a timeline for grief. But grief is about the heart space. And the heart doesn't have any timelines. The heart doesn't work with deadlines. It doesn't have complete understanding of everything. And so I think the invitation for us is to embrace the uncertainty and to be willing to sit in that space of sadness. It may take as long as it takes, but be open to it and see what it's changing within you. See what this experience of grief and sadness is bringing up for healing within you. And don't be in a rush, don't be in a hurry to get to some destination of complete healing, because I believe we are healing and learning and growing and evolving as long as we are on planet Earth. There is no destination. It's all about how we travel those roads.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. There's no destination, it's the journey. And so being able to sit and be with that, yeah. I know that one of your beautiful podcasts, which we'll share in a minute, has to do with kind of 4 healthy ways to kind of move through grief. You want to talk about those for a minute?
Yeah, I'm not exactly clear what I said in that podcast, but I think I said feel your feelings for sure.
Yes.
That's, I think, the first step of doing any kind of healing work. You have to be willing to sit with the feelings and feel them. And then the other thing is to move to a space of not judging what you're going through or comparing or competing with anybody. I hear people say this all the time. My friend lost her brother in a drowning accident and it's only been 4 months. She's doing so much better. Here I am 3 years after my mother passed away. I'm still crying. I still have days when I can't get out of bed. I'm still depressed. I've lost so much weight. I don't look like I used to before. So we have all these judgments and comparisons. And I would say your grief is as unique as your fingerprints. And you can't have anybody else's fingerprints. Similarly, nobody else can experience your grief. You can't expect your grief to be like anyone else's. So I would say honor your grief. It's proof that you loved someone well and deeply. And so
Yes.
honor the process and feel it and sit with it and see what kind of healing is coming up for you. So I would really encourage people to embrace patience on the journey, to embrace uncertainty on the journey, to honor you for who you are. Your grief doesn't have to resemble anyone else's.
Beautiful. That, that comparison piece is huge, because I hear that a lot too. So-and-so's grief is more than mine, or worse, and we begin to kind of hierarch the loss, and a loss is a loss. And I love what you said about, the depth of our grief, I say to people, is in direct proportion to the love that we had.
Yeah.
And so being able to say, you know what, take the time that you need. Where I think that sometimes we can tend to, and let's jump into this a little bit, is that, yes, grief is unique for each of us, absolutely, and there's no time frame, and there's no, you go through step A, B, C, D. Where I think sometimes that we can get into a little deeper pit is when we park there. And we're not talking about moving through to do, but being able to kind of be with it. But when we park ourselves, we don't yield, but we park ourselves into kind of that space of deep depression, and then there's a space there for kind of maybe some therapy or mental health coaching and counseling, depending on where someone is and based on their history. But being able to yield there, to move through it, but not necessarily to park there, and as you
You're
say,
absolutely right.
Opening your heart. So talk a little bit about that, being able to kind of move through that, because ultimately to be able to move to the other side, and a little bit more of your story of the transformation that occurred. So we're not talking about rushing the process, but we're talking about being able to move forward at a pace where you can begin to see what are some of the gifts from this experience. What is the transformation? What, as you say beautifully, what is your heart trying to tell you?
Yeah. I teach an e-course called From Grief to Gratitude, and you can look this up on my website. And one of the pieces in that e-course I talk about is shape-shifting your grief story. And that's what you just talked about, Kim, which is that you have this painful story of loss. You have this painful story that brings you sadness every time you think about it. But you have to, at some point, move through that story. You have to shapeshift that story to tell yourself, or to share a message that is more empowering than the story itself. Yes, it happened and you don't like it. You don't have to like what happened. I didn't like it when my mother passed away. I didn't like it when my father passed away. But you have to accept it. And it's in the acceptance piece that the story starts to shift. It's not about blaming anybody. It's not about blaming the universe or God, although there is a place for that as well, because I did all of that. I blamed God. I was mad at God. I thought my faith would pull my mother through. I didn't understand why she had to die when she was only 68, when there are so many survivors of cancer who are much older. So again, the whole comparison, the whole, why didn't I get the better story? Why didn't I get the fairy tale ending? But you have to make sense of your story by moving through it and seeing that loss and death and grief aren't about an unkind universe. They are part of life. Everything that's born dies. Everything that is born must die someday. So, and it's hard. I mean, I get that, when you lose a child, it's the hardest thing in the world. I mean, I have the greatest empathy for people who lose their children. How do you get through something like that? How do you move past turmoil of that kind? But at some point, I think getting deeper into the story of what is this thing called death? Why do we die? Why did I incarnate as a soul? What happens when I leave? What happens when a loved one leaves? And are we going to connect again? Do we connect in a space that I don't see through my five senses or feel through my five senses? It's in getting curious about death and in trying to understand what this story of loss means to you, what the gifts of this experience mean to you, that you begin to move past staying parked in that space of grief and loss. And that is such an important piece, because that is what will save you. If you stay stuck in your story of grief and loss, you are going to shut down your heart. you aren't going to open up. You aren't going to heal or feel what you're going through, but you're going to stay stuck in that space and become corroded by grief, become bitter, be in the space of blaming. And
Mm.
that doesn't help anybody, you know? The only thing you can do is take the energy of this pain and invest the energy in purpose and meaning. You can either invest it in anger and sadness and depression, um, and being bitter with the world at what happened to you, what a terrible deal life threw your way. Or you can say, I'm feeling this way today and I need to move through this. Yes, I need to move past processing it. But once I'm beyond that, I'm going to sit with it and see what really is this experience all about? What is it moving me
Mm.
toward? And that, I would say, is what saved me, Kim. I moved
Mm.
closer toward death instead of away from it. When my mother passed away, I got really curious. I wanted to understand the soul's journey. And that's what I teach people that work with me today, because it's in finding that space that true healing happens. It's in finding the space where you can shift your story and understand it in the larger perspective, where you don't see yourself as a victim, but you see
Mhm.
yourself as just a human being, a spiritual being having a human experience and having to move through this body, shed the body, and move on to something else, that you begin to receive the greatest gifts of your experience.
Mm. Beautiful. Curiosity, discovery, allowing the heart.
Yeah,
I mean, this is beautiful, and it's a, you know, we're not taught this, right? We're not
we're
taught that
not.
this is that
Mhm.
we're taught to avoid and run and move fast
Yeah.
and do. And that doing has its place, but you need to be and be present and open your heart. I think in listening to some of your podcasts, you know, I was hearing about just be open to the possibility of allowing some light to just penetrate your heart, just even a crack. Once the door, the heart is open a little bit, you know, just allow that light in and then just see where that takes you.
Yeah. You know, right after my mother passed away, and she passed away in wintertime in Chicago, when the landscape was dreary and drab and gray. But when there was a fresh snowfall, for the briefest of moments, I was able to tune into the magic of that snowfall and say, wow, in the midst of this terrible sadness and darkness that surrounds me, there is the magic of snowfall. The universe moves on. The
Mm,
universe does present opportunities for me every single day to connect with beauty and joy, even if it is for a
mm,
fleeting moment. So find those
mm,
fleeting moments in the middle of your sadness. It could be a flower in bloom, it could be a song, it could be the sound of a child's laughter. Anything that uplifts you, I would say just grab that moment and hold on to it, because it is in these ordinary moments that extraordinary healing begins to happen.
mm. And so, where did the transformation, the work that you did in terms of being able to sit and really discover and explore, what then unfolded for you in terms of your transformation from your mother's passing?
So I became really clear that our time on earth is limited. It's not like I didn't know it before, but when someone you love passes away, there's a sense of urgency, and that's the sense of urgency I found myself experiencing. I said to myself, I don't have all the time in the world. How am I going to use the time I have in a way that's meaningful and purposeful? And to me, it's a seven-letter word, service, that really helped me heal. I told
Mm,
myself that as long as I can go to bed every night, having served the world in some way, having made the world a better place for someone, and it doesn't have to be magnificent and magnanimous like Martin Luther King or Mother Teresa, but how can I serve in the space that I'm in the community that I live in the home that I create for my family? What are those moments where I can serve? And that's when opportunities started showing up for me to work with the elderly. And truly,
mm,
who knows grieving better than the elderly? They have
mm-hmm,
had so many losses over their lifetimes, not just physical deaths of people they love, but having to move out of a neighborhood they've lived in for 40 some years, having to adapt to life in a community and making new friends. They know loss like nobody else. They are cut off from family and friends they've known. They don't understand technology. The world is hurtling forward at a crazy pace when their own lives are slowing down and slowly grinding to a halt. They know loss on an everyday basis. They can't do what they used to do. Their limbs are failing them. Their memory is failing them. And in that moment of loss and grief that they experience every single day of their lives, I was able to connect with that. I was able to connect with these people and find a bridge to their hearts. So in serving these people who were lonely, who longed for companionship, who were very focused on their failings and not so much on their accomplishments through their entire adult lives, it was that connection that really saved me. I just started working with them. I started doing things for the elderly. I created a life story group. I would visit nursing homes and just spend time giving an elder a massage, listening to their stories, wiping their tears. And every moment that I spent serving somebody, I was able to step out of that sense of self-absorption that here I was, grounded in my own grief. I could connect with somebody else's grief. And when that happens, you become aware that grief is a universal experience. So from the singular, you're able to move into the universal. And that started opening my heart. That was my salvation.
Beautiful. So service, being of service, so gratitude, and then you're right, stepping out to kind of connect with others, because grief is a universal experience. We go through it individually, but as a collective, it's a universal experience. Wow. That's so beautiful. You know, we hear that so often, you know, really helping and supporting someone else just comes back 100-fold to us. And as you're describing, for you, it really put things in perspective to say, wow, you know, this is a universal experience here. And what a gift that you were able to give to the seniors.
I received so much more from them than I could ever give them. But it's so interesting that I'm from a culture that's so alien to them. And I don't know a thing about the world they grew up in. At least I didn't when I moved here. So it was interesting to build these bridges and discover that you are as human as I am. You have the same needs that I do. You cry just like me. You know, we laugh like each other. We want the same things. We care about families. It doesn't matter that I came from an ocean away and didn't know big band music and Duke Ellington and, you know, all those things that are so much a part of the seniors world. But we were able to make the most meaningful connections where it mattered.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and to even branch that out in terms of, you know, whatever arena we find ourselves in, whether it's working with the elderly or our neighbor next door or a stranger in the supermarket, you know, being able to realize that we do have a shared experience in terms of that, and that, you know, we really all come from the heart. And as you say, you know, underneath it all, we really do want the same things, to be loved, to be accepted. And so being able to kind of share that and that realization. So wow, thank you, Uma. This is great. Let me just take a moment, if it's okay, and just check in with the chat and see what's going on here.
Sure, we should do that.
Yes, and I appreciate that folks have been making comments in, and this is great. Mary, I'm going to get to you in just one moment. Mary from Boston, I think you have something very important to share. Hi, Kennedy from California. Let me see here. Oh, so Claire says there's a poem, The Guest House by Rumi is a great poem about this very topic. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with that. Yes, you're so right.
Great. Jacqueline, what you don't feel, you won't heal. Yes, Uma said that's beautiful. And I share that as well. It's true. If we can't feel it, we can't heal it. That's really the bottom line. Or medicate ourselves. Yeah, that's true, Jacqueline. So Kennedy writes, corroded by grief. Love that. Hard to heal corrosion. Yeah. What do you want to share about that, Uma?
Corrosion happens when you don't pay attention, right? You let it rust. And so I
Yes.
go back to what I said, that you have to feel, you have to hold it up to the light, you have to cry the tears that are bubbling up inside of you, you have to feel the sadness, you have to be mad, punch a pillow if you like, journal about it. There are so many ways in which you can let grief out. There are so many gates that the human body provides to
Mm.
allow grief to move out and through you. But we tend to dam it up. And when we dam it, that's when the body starts to get ill. As you very rightly said, Kim, that you've experienced this personally. So I'm sure you can talk more to that. But I
Mm-hmm.
have worked with people who have suppressed their grief for many years and have come to a place where they can't do it anymore because their body can't take it.
Right. You know, grief is, you know, an energy, you know, energy in motion. And so being able to try and contain that in this beautiful container that we have, our human body,
Yes.
it's not really, it's not meant to stay stuck in there. And it does, you know, whether it's
Hmm.
digestive issues like I had, or migraines, or chest pain, or, you know, a whole host of things that really, like you said, at some point we can't contain it anymore. You know, it's going
Yeah.
to come out somehow because it's energy, and it energy in motion. And if we're putting a stop gate, a dam there, you know, to block that up, well, it's going to come out somehow. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would agree. I would agree. So let's chat a little bit because Mary, let me get back to Mary's comment. And Mary, you have our undying support here, and we're sending you virtual hugs. Mary says that she is a mother who recently lost her only child, her son, to a drug overdose, and her grief is overwhelming. So Mary, as others have said, I'm reading here that they're sending you love and support. Know that I'm sending it as well, and I'm sure Uma can speak that she is as well. But let's talk a little bit, Uma, about fresh grief. You're raw. You know, Mary says this is a recent loss of her only child. So there's a number of layers there. But what's important when it's new and it's fresh and it's a recent grief and loss for you?
First of all, Mary, I want to say my heart goes out to you. I mean, I really feel tremendous empathy for you. I'm so sorry for your loss. And know that we're with you. I'm sending you lots of prayers and lots of love for your healing. I will say a special prayer for you tonight before I go to bed as well. When grief and pain are so fresh and raw, I believe that you can only do what you absolutely can do, which is to take the next breath, which is to put one foot forward, take a shower, get out of bed, congratulate yourself on every little thing you're able to do in the moment, because grief, fresh grief, is just intensely painful. And if you are feeling raw and vulnerable, I would suggest surround yourself with people who you feel safe with. Because anybody saying anything that's hurtful and not too sensitive is going to feel like, you know, a stab in the heart. And people don't know what to say. They don't know how to say it sensitively. It's not about you, it's about them. But I get that you are in this very raw, vulnerable place. And so I would say surround yourself with people you feel safe with, and only sort of deal with people who understand what you need and are able to attend to your needs. So
Mm,
if you need for someone to cook dinner for you, by all means ask. If you need someone to just be with you and not speak, ask for that. If you just need someone to hold you, ask for that. Ask for what you need from people you feel safe with. And know that you're supported. Although grief, when it's fresh and raw, feels intensely lonely, feels very, very personal, um, you just have to put one foot in front of another and do what you absolutely can. Sometimes it's just taking the next breath. That's what I would say to you. Just be kind to
mm,
yourself, be compassionate, and look after you, because your heart is broken. You need the most love and care at this time. So just barricade yourself with safe people and look after your broken heart.
mm. Such beautiful words. Yes. Yes, Mary, you know that, you know, all of us here are with you and supporting you. And, you know, as Uma said, you know, even if it's the next breath, you know, just be
Yeah.
able to take care of what it is that you need and know that, you know, you're surrounded and supported. So, yeah, and thank you. And we're so so happy that you made the choice tonight to come to the webinar here and to share, to be really vulnerable and to share what's going on for you, and so that you can get the support. And I see that others in the chat have really expressed their condolences and their support and sending you hugs. So we're so happy that you're here. So great.
Yeah, the very fact that she's here on the webinar, Mary, I would say kudos to you for showing up, for sharing your story. It tells me that you really want to move through this. You want to look after yourself, and you want to honor the soul of this beautiful child that you lost. And again, I'm so very sorry.
Yeah. Well, we also have a comment here from Claire. Leonard Cohen, in his song Anthem, has a line about the crack is where the light gets in which so much of what we're speaking about tonight. So yeah, so all of us, wherever we are on our journey, being able to allow that light in. And if it's just a crack, then that's fine. Just allow the light to get in there. So great. Now, Claire has an
judge the crack as broken, but like I said, we're not broken, we're just human. And when we're cracked, that's when the light shows through. When you shut yourself off, when you shut your heart and don't connect, don't deal with your pain, then you don't allow the light to get in. And we need a tiny sliver of light to somehow make its way to that dark space within us for that healing to begin.
Beautiful. Thank you, Uma. That's beautiful the way you said it. Now, Claire is asking, what if you don't have that kind of community? I'm thinking she's talking about the supportive community around you.
If you don't have that kind of a supportive community, I would say find some kind of a grief coach or a grief support group. Support groups that have good facilitators are often a safe space for you to grieve. When I was new in the States, I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends to go to, and yet my grief was so raw and intense that I found a grief support group in a church. And everything about it was new, but it was a safe space in that I could sit there and cry and be understood. People would hand me tissues and hold my hand. That's really all I needed more than anything at the time. So you can find yourself a support group like that, or find a one-on-one support coach. Because these people like Kim and myself and many others, we are trained to deal with your grief and sadness. We are trained not to judge it. We are trained to be that sacred and safe container. So this kind of support can even happen in a one-on-one setting. You don't necessarily need a whole community of people, but slowly you will start to unpeel the layers and start to heal yourself. So that's what I would say to you, Claire. I hope that was useful.
Great, beautiful. And Mary wrote a beautiful comment. She said, thank you for all the beautiful comments. She's so grateful for the support, loving her beautiful son, Andrew. Well, beautiful. Okay, so Uma, let's talk a little bit about your book and your podcast. So do you have your book you can show people?
I do, yes.
Great.
Right there.
Great. Losing Amma, Finding Home. So what made you choose the title?
I had no idea that the title would be such a hit when I first thought of it or wrote it down. It was just a flash of insight in a moment. But I wanted to use the word Amma to signify my culture, or at least that I was from a culture that was different. And Amma is the word for mother. I think the main idea behind my title is that my mother was my beginning. She was my foundation. She was the first person to love me. And when I lost her, I felt the ground beneath my feet disappear. So through all the work that I did towards healing my broken heart and finding my purpose and helping others who are grieving a loss today, I found my way back home to myself. And when I speak about home, it's the metaphorical home of, Chicago was my new home, my hometown, Chennai, where I used to live, didn't feel like home without Amma. I had moved. And so there was this question of which is home? Is it Chennai? Is it Chicago? And then when I lost my mother, the whole question of I've lost my home, my first beginning. Her womb was my first home. And so I had to then sort of find my way back home to my own soul. And that's what happened through my journey of healing. I found my way back to who I am, what I am meant to do with this life, why I was incarnated, and how my mother's passing actually moved me to my second chapter. So that was Finding Home. It was a multi-layered meaning, but I'm very glad I came to it, because in the moment I thought of it, I'm not sure I had all these different connotations in mind, but people have attributed meanings to it. And, in retrospect, I understand and believe that there was a reason why I came up with Finding Home, because find home I did.
And this is a memoir of your transformation, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. I have the Kindle version, so I can't hold up the the hard copy. So I'm glad that you did. But yeah, I'd encourage people. Where can they get a copy of your book, Uma?
It's available both in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon and through my website. So my website is umagirish.com, but it's also available on Amazon, and there are lots of reviews there if you want to read them before you make a decision.
Great. And Uma's website is right under her name and her picture there, umagirish.com. And so I alluded a little bit to your podcast, Uma, but share a little bit about that, because that's an excellent resource for people.
Right. So my podcast is called The Grammar of Grief. It's available on both iTunes and Stitcher Radio. And I started doing this podcast as a way to give people a short little burst of inspiration. So every episode that I record is only 5 to 7 minutes long. And that's as much time as I think grieving people have. That's as much headspace as grieving people have to absorb information, because you're dealing with something so powerful and so significant. So the purpose, the intention of my podcast is to bring to the space that we often don't talk about, death and dying and conversations about the soul. My intention is to provide a safe space to answer those big life questions, to make sense of this really difficult topic, to try and understand why we die, what's the meaning of life, what's the meaning of purpose and passion, what can we do with this grief, what are some ways to deal with our grief. I answer all kinds of questions on that podcast. And also the different kinds of loss that we suffer, the loss of our identity, the loss of a job, the loss of a home, the loss of relationships, death, divorce, illness. There are all kinds of losses that we have to contend with on a daily basis, small and big. So my intention is to provide a space for people to take in that little burst of inspiration every week. And the way to subscribe to my podcast, if you have an iTunes account, that's very easily done. Look for The Grammar of Grief. The image of my podcast, the cover image, is a circle of butterflies. So you should find that easily. And I'm sure Kim will post the link as well. So you can subscribe to the podcast. And that's a way to make sure that you get a fresh episode every week as soon as I post it.
And I have to say, listening to some of them, they're very beautiful. And I love, Uma, that, they're short. Like you said, people that are grieving, we don't want to take in a whole lot, we just don't have the capacity. So just the short little 5 to 7 minute, powerful message, and always ending with, an introspective question, to help people to either sit with and be with, or what is their next step if they're at that point in their journey. So thank you for those. Those are a fabulous resource, and I'd encourage all our listeners to go and check that out. So,
thank
you,
and
Uma, sure. And one last piece, you are involved with the International Grief Council. So share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the International Grief Council is myself and 2 other beautiful women. We are from 3 different cultures, 3 different countries. We belong to 3 different religions, but we've all been irrevocably changed by grief and loss. So my friend Loanne lost her mother and her daughter. My friend Daniela lost her brother in a drowning accident. I lost my mother. And so we came together to form the International Grief Council as a way to help people who are struggling through grief and loss, and to educate them that grief does bring gifts. You can't see it in the moment, but no matter how difficult your journey is, you will get to a point where you will begin to see that grief and loss have moved you to a place of purpose and passion and meaning. This is irrespective of race, color, creed, caste, nationality. And that's why we felt that the three of us, who are from very, very different backgrounds, countries, cultures, religions, made a powerful statement by coming together. In fact, we are doing our first two talks at the end of September in New Jersey. So you can visit the internationalgriefcouncil.org website for details about that. We are also doing a book reading at a bookstore called Namaste in New York. So if you're interested in those events and you happen to live locally, do check us out. We'd love to meet you and give you some hugs.
Great. Thank you, Uma. Yeah, it's important. And I love that, you know, the three women that have come together, like you said, from, once again, it's another reinforcement of grief and the experience of being universal across cultures and continents and experiences, because you, each of the three of you had different experience with the loss, but yet the common universal experience. So it's another example of that. So beautiful. So thank you about that. And just checking back in the chat here, we just want to, Carmen writes, my husband of 19 years just died. His memorial is this Saturday. He was diagnosed with a fast-growing pancreatic cancer several weeks after being in intense pain for months. His death feels like the death of our biggest dream. We had moved out of the country to a small island where I must return. Carmen, again, we send our sincere condolences and big hugs. And again, similar to Mary, congratulations for being here tonight and sharing. You know, that as Uma said earlier, you know, that's a huge step for you with such a recent loss to be here and to share. And hopefully you're feeling the love and support, because again, what a beautiful community we have here. People on the webinar that are expressing their condolences and sending big hugs to you. And please accept that from myself. And Uma, I just want to give that to you to also reply.
Carmen, I'm so terribly sorry for your loss. My heart is so full of grief and sadness for you on your behalf, because when we lose a loved one, I think we all connect in the deepest level. So know that we are here with you, we are feeling with you. And I can see from all the comments in the chat box and how people are reaching out to you and holding space for you that everyone feels your pain in some way. This is why we cry when we watch a tragedy on television, because we connect at the most primal level of our humanness when someone else is suffering. So know that our prayers and blessings and wishes for peace go to you. It is a very, very difficult loss. I speak about this when I do workshops, that grief is really the death of a dream. The life you had with your husband, the dream that you created together, is shattered, and you have to find another dream to move from this pain and sadness. But you have to feel through the pain and the sadness. You have to honor your husband's memory, the love that you shared, the memories you created. And so you will find your way through this path, which will then lead to another path, which you probably can't see right now because you're in so much pain. And so I ask you to honor your grief. Celebrate the man who loved you, who shared his time and his life with you. But the fact that you're saying that it feels like the death of a dream tells me that you have wonderful awareness about what's happening to you, what's going on in your heart space. So be kind to yourself, be compassionate, allow it to take as much time as it will, but know and believe that your heart is capable of healing in a powerful and significant way and helping you do things that you didn't think possible at this time.
Beautiful, beautiful. You know, and I just want to read a comment from Mary, you know, that she's hoping to get out and start speaking at schools to reach young kids and teach the message they need to hear about drugs and how they will kill you. So yeah, Mary, as Uma said earlier, you know, being of service and being able to get out there, and what a beautiful message that you could share with the young people. That's wonderful. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah, what a purposeful way to turn your pain into your passion. Because this is why we have pain, right? Pain is meant to move through us and move us to our next chapters. We are meant to create through our pain. We're not meant to shut down. We are meant to open up in bigger, wider ways. And to me, it seems really powerful what Mary is saying here, that she's actually identified her purpose and she's going to find meaning in doing this work. So congratulations, Mary. I think you're on the road to recovery in a very
Yeah,
small way, but you're definitely moving the right direction.
absolutely. How beautiful. So we have one more question here from Jacqueline asking regarding men, how men and women grieve. And I'm assuming that's a question about, do they grieve differently?
Men and women do grieve very differently. Men tend to be more fixed about their grief, and women need to talk and connect and bond and have less trouble, I would say, overall, although I don't believe in generalizations, but overall, I think because women are more nurturing and more in touch with their heart space, they tend to find it easier to express feelings in a way that men can't. Men struggle to express their emotions, and sometimes the hardest challenge when you're going through grief with your partner is to find that common ground. And sometimes there isn't any common ground. So we tend to judge how our men are grieving, and they tend to judge how we are grieving. And fresh conflicts can arise because of that. So I have been through this myself in my personal experience. My husband lost his father in November of 2014, and his grief looked very different from mine. Not better, not worse, just different. And that's something we need to be aware of. Don't judge how someone else should grieve. Focus on what you need to do for yourself. Understand that we are wired differently. We have different brains. We have different emotion centers. Some centers don't light up in men as much as they do in women. And so just honor where you are, honor where your man is, and let's just be kind to one another in the way we express our grief.
Great. Beautiful. Well, Uma, we're approaching the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of people's times. This has been such a rich, rich conversation with beautiful engagement from and comments and questions and support for one another. So I just want to turn it back over to you, Uma, and any parting words, anything that you really want to leave our listeners with tonight before I close us up.
Sure. I want to say that loss is a sacred doorway. And when you walk through that doorway, you're changed forever. When you look back at the life you lived, it's almost like someone has painted over that life and you can't find your way back. But that's what loss and grief are about. You're meant to walk ahead, carrying with you the memories of your loved one. And I also want to make an offer, Kim, for any 3 people that are really, really serious about private coaching, one-on-one coaching with me. I'm happy to get on the phone and talk to you, hear a little about your story, where you are, and what your struggles are, and I'm willing to help you. So if you're really serious about this work and you feel like you're ready to move into the space of healing, then please email me, uma@umagirish.com. Write to me, and we can get on the phone and talk about it. And this is available to the first 3 people who email me.
Beautiful, Uma. Thank you so much. What a wonderful offer, generous offer that you're making. So really, anyone that's listening and those of you that will be watching the replay, please be in touch. If you are serious about beginning to move forward in your journey of loss, contact Uma and see, have a chat and see if it feels like a fit for the 2 of you to have a conversation and begin the work. So, wow. So again, Uma, thank you so much. This has just been wonderful. I'm so appreciative to be able to talk about a topic that's so near and dear to me, and to have you here to really provide so much information, such value, and thank you, thank you, thank you.
Kim, I'm deeply grateful to you and for every single person who's been on this webinar live, for everyone who will listen on the replay. Thank you for your time. Your time is precious. And for the fact that you spent it with me and Kim, I thank you all very much.
Great. Well, thank you. And again, so thank you all. So this will be, actually, let me share with you that a number of you have asked to have me do a webinar around advanced care planning and some of the work that I'm doing. So 2 weeks from tonight, I'm actually going to be providing a free webinar, content-driven webinar around advanced care planning and what that is, why we are resistant a lot of times. Oh, looks like we stopped. No, we're back on. One of the main reasons is that because people are so afraid that it's too early to make plans. Well, it's never too early, or it's only too early when it's too late. So therefore, I'll be doing that webinar. And so be looking for that registration link in your inbox the next week or so, but that will be on Thursday, July 23rd. So thank you again, everyone. We so appreciate all the engagement tonight, and hope that you really enjoy this. And we will see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.